Hi, Sloan here. What if we were able to address the audio issues that we experienced earlier this month? Thanks to our indefatigable editor, Andy Rode, we've hopefully done that. And so now you should be able to explore a much better and more interesting question in this episode that's totally unrelated to the technology we use in our production process. Specifically, what if the secret to effective philanthropy was to give up control? Our guests on this episode explored exactly that question in a recent book called Letting Go: How Philanthropists and Impact Investors Can Do More Good by Giving Up Control. They are Meg Massey, a journalist covering social impact and social justice in finance, and Ben Wrobel, the Director of Communications at Village Capital. We'll talk with them about the intrinsically undemocratic nature of traditional philanthropy, the structures that have helped innovative investors and grant makers get around that, and some of the innovative financial institutions that have evolved in this mold. It's still early days for the model they describe, but there's plenty to be excited about. After all, we're talking about stakeholder capitalism on steroids here, right? This is a framework that doesn't just listen to community members, it puts them in control. As usual, we take questions from you at the end. On this episode, we talk about greenwashing and asset management, the role of spirituality in sustainable investing, and whether or not California has something called winter. Stick around. And if you're looking to do a good deed, tell someone about this podcast, or even reach out to us with a question that we can answer in a future episode. Send us an email at freemoneypod@gmail.com whenever the heck you want to talk. And if you leave us a funny comment on the Apple Podcast Store or some other review website, we'll probably read it out loud on the podcast. Thanks so much for listening. And, with that, I guess, take it away, Sharkbait.
Ahoy, Free Money Podcast listeners! I'm Sharkbait Buckley, the Disclosure Pirate, and I'm here to set ye straight about what's going on with this here show. Sloan Ortel works for Invest Vegan LLC, a New York registered investment advisor. Ashby Monk works for Stanford University, Adapar, Future Proof, Long Game, and various startups. All opinions expressed by either Sloan or Ashby are entirely their own, and do not reflect the opinions of their crew or any company. Clients who invest vegan may maintain positions in securities and strategies discussed in this podcast. Advisory services are only offered to clients or prospective clients where Invest Vegan and its representatives are properly licensed or exempted, and a client agreement has been executed. Arr.
Here comes the money.
Here we go. Money talk.
Here comes the money.
Welcome to the Free Money Podcast. This is where we give you the Brooklyn Bay Area consensus about institutional investing. Let's be honest, you crave it.
They do. The only time they might not crave it is when they're living through a climate apocalypse, which seems to be happening more and more. Apparently, 1/3 of Americans have lived through some form of a climate apocalypse this year. And you're one of them, Sloan.
Yeah,
Are you okay?
We made it through fine. Fortunately, we're on the third floor. My landlord, who lives in the basement, had the basement flood, and his dog got sick, and he had this birthday. We had our roof actually burst open, which was
wow.
That's probably overselling it. We had a leak in the roof, and then it kind of went down.
Implode.
Yeah, it caused like a little bubble. You know how the water bubble happens?
I do.
And Claire and I were just like sitting in the living room waiting for it to pop. It was like 11:45 at night, and we're just like, well, fuck. I guess, it's going to do what it wants.
You mean the giant water bubble in the paint? Is it responding to your requests? Okay.
No joke. I could curl up inside of this bubble. It's like, it's now dried out, and, the roof's been patched, but the bubble is still there. And there is enough size. It's size enough for a human in the fetal position.
My goodness.
Yeah, it's really not chill. It's not even a little bit chill.
No, but it is, it's all part of ultimately why we want to mobilize this capital. And that goes into some of my news stories, but finish your thought before I do the news.
It's so funny. Like, I think, I was talking with a friend on the phone, and like in the course of that, we realized that we'd had 2 hurricanes in New York City in 1 week. We had the aftermath of another hurricane that hit us before at it. So like, I mean, how anyone can be unmobilized after this. I mean, I guess the reality is just, life sucks and then you wake up and you muddle through. But I'm hoping it was a wake up call for some people.
Yeah. Yeah. Except there is a little bit of news out there building on this that
You say?
I do. That
What a shame.
the climate related investment funds that are out there actually, according to new research, do a terrible job of actually reducing climate change. It was something like 70 of the 130 ESG related funds that have climate as their mission are not even sufficient to get us to Paris agreements in terms of their investment strategy. And so that comes up. We're going to talk about this a little bit later, I think. But we are seeing a lot of this ESG insanity, and I think we're going to end up with a lot more oversight just because it doesn't seem like it's working. Just saying that it's an ESG fund isn't enough to actually drive capital towards sustainable investments.
Yep. Yeah. And like so many people, I mean, the sustainable, I, went through and screened out all those sustainable indexes recently. And when I picked up the KLD, which is the oldest sustainable index, I thought that there would be maybe it's a 400 entity index. I thought there would be maybe 50 that didn't meet the criteria. Close to half of them got screened out. Like companies like McDonald's are in there. Who
Wow.
are you kidding?
Yeah.
I mean, that's not sustainable. It's sort of this corporate, please everybody version of sustainability that just, is not fit for purpose.
Yeah, that one, that was an interesting one. There was a couple more news stories on this topic, though, Sloan. One is that we are seeing increasing amount of evidence that taking a sustainable approach drives outperformance. And one from our good friends in Sweden, AP2 is one of the more quantitative buffer funds in Sweden, in Gothenburg, if I'm not mistaken.
Very goth.
We got to watch ourselves here. We can't get too Swedish accented. I almost did the chef, but I avoided it. The fund has been crushing it this year. They've had their best half year performance. They're beating all their benchmarks. And oh, by the way, they used this moment to remind everybody that their entire portfolio, from fixed income to equities to real estate to private equities, has a climate risk lens baked right into it, where they're tilting away from everything and into climate, trying to get out of the dirty and into the clean. And the performance is there. So clearly it can work if you have the right approach and belief structure.
Yep. I mean, I think I see on Twitter all the time, people are like, coal prices are picking up a little bit. And people are like, whoa, maybe it's time to buy the rally. And I feel like if people dedicated a third of the energy that they do to trying to top tick or bottom tick or, kind of market time, these cyclical energy things, and instead focused on not murdering the planet with their energy investments.
It's almost like you're suggesting they should do fundamental analysis instead of staring at charts.
I mean, yeah, I hate to be a buzzkill. I hate to be that chick with the, security analysis copy and all that stuff. But I mean, come on, you got to actually know what the companies do.
But then you don't get to have fun with charts, Sloan. That's the problem. Point. Nobody wants to do spreadsheets. They want to do head and shoulders graphs in Bloomberg.
Someone asked me last week if I believe in astrology, and it was I believe in it exactly as much as I believe in technical analysis.
Which is fully full belief.
I live my life on the basis of it.
I literally read my horoscope and plan my day. Okay, future fund back in the news. Second to last news story here, Sloan, for your FUI. By the way, I've decided that the new FYI is IFY. Information for you. Information for you.
Neat.
IFY.
That's the title. That's so lady.
Because FYI sounds a little freaking aggressive.
Yeah, it's like a little
FUI there, pal.
IFY is like a little gift
Yeah, it's a little gift for you. Anyway, some IFY. That's maybe what we'll call the news from now on. IFY. Future Fund came out with this neat little policy paper, which, of course, is the nerd I've voraciously read. They have 10 little things that they're like, makes us scared in the world. They put out this paper. And it includes things you'd expect, like inflation and climate and interesting things in there. But it was a very interesting lead-in to see these 10 different indicators driving into a new portfolio construction because they're like, we're heading into an uncertain world, and so we need a new portfolio construction. Here's the 10 things we're worried about, and here's what we're doing about it. And what raised my eyebrows a little bit was the sheer scale of cash money that they are now holding. How much cash, Sloan, do you think the Future Fund has now?
It is above 10%. I'm going to say 13%.
You're going percentages. I just want to know how much cash.
How much cash?
How much like Scrooge McDuck activity?
Oh, wow. Like, okay, so how deep is the pool that Scrooge dives into? Got it. I'm going, I don't know how big Future Fund is, but I'm going to say 75 billion.
A little bit much.
What about 26
billion? How about 100 trillion of cash? A quadrillion of cash, right?
Yeah, they sold some NFTs, and then like.
Yeah. No, I get you. Yeah, I thought 26 billion sounded like a lot of cash, but
26 billion sounds like a lot of cash. I mean, like that. Like, what can you do with that? I mean, that is like roughly the size of the economy of Sri Lanka. And
we used to talk about cash drag on funds, like that's not invested and you've got inflation. By the way, they've got inflation written down as one of their fears, and they're sitting on a lot of cash. So that's an interesting one. But my
cash has option value. I mean, maybe they're out here waiting for, some kind of like, some big dislocation that like we've all been.
I believe they're seeing the dislocations and they're getting ready to, position themselves for a reinvestment. This is counter-cyclicality, I think maybe we're saying.
Yep.
Final news item. News item of the year. Okay.
Wow.
Or at least hilarious story of the year. Maybe recategorize. The latest company to jump into the sustainable ESG finance craze full force is Philip Morris.
Oh, sad. I love to see that stuff.
Wow. Oh, yes. The one company that provides things that kill you has now decided that it is entering the game. And to give them some credit, it's pretty hilarious when you read what they are going after. They are issuing a series of bonds. Let's call them murder bonds. And the goal of these bonds, and they'll have to pay a higher interest rate if they fail to meet these goals, is to reduce the percentage of cigarettes in their revenue, right? So they want to actually use these bonds to get out of the cigarette business and into something else.
The vaping industry?
Yeah, opioid. I think opioids are the next one.
Yeah, we're really interested in moving up the value chain of addictive products. Our share of wallet with cigarettes is only like 3%. We could, with heroin, we could be
through the roof.
I mean, they made a lot of news around Davos for saying that they would phase out cigarettes entirely, and of course, the unstated implication is that they're just going to be selling Juuls to all the kids.
Yeah.
It's like,
do they own Juul?
They either own it or it's a joint venture or they have a big competitor. I don't participate in that sort of vaping. I'm a classy gal. So,
just full cigarettes.
I'm more of a cigar kind of gal. Like, I'm a regular Monica Lewinsky.
I'm a tobacco pipe kind of a guy.
Yeah.
I get my leather elbow jacket on and walk around campus with my pipe tobacco.
You get a PhD. Doesn't like one of those come with it?
My mom literally gave me a jacket that has leather elbows.
That's hilarious.
It's pretty fantastic.
That's hilarious.
That's my news. That's the news.
That's pretty. I love how it fits in perfectly with the present dystopia.
Yes.
I think it reminds me of earlier today, actually, I was like, going like, who are the 100 biggest, there's a paper that someone did where they're like the 100 biggest carbon emitters cause 75% of overall carbon emissions.
That's right.
And I was like, who's the worst carbon emitter again? Just curious, just wondering. And it's obviously Suncor, the Canadian oil sands company.
Oh, is it? I thought you were going to say Exxon or something like that.
No.
Oh, no, it's Suncor.
I mean, Exxon is too strategically muddled to be the worst.
Yeah.
But
too diversified. As like,
diversified,
yeah,
exactly.
They got tobacco.
They're watering down the murder.
Yeah.
But like
again, remember murder bonds. This is a pretty good financial product innovation. The fewer people your company kills, the lower your interest rate goes on the bond. That's pretty good. That's a win-win, I think.
If we were just a little bit more evil, I think we'd be sitting on a huge market opportunity here. But yeah, when you go to Suncor, their sustainability report is like their big splash, and they've got a picture of an oil engineer holding a plant and being like,
no,
it's too much. But fortunately, we have a guest to talk to.
Let's talk to that guest.
Yeah, Massey.
Do we have two guests?
We have one out of two, and the number two, I'm sure, will join us soon. Meg Massey is a journalist covering social impact and social justice in the world of finance. Ben Wrobel, who has not joined yet, is the director of communications at Village Capital, which does participatory investing. They wrote a book together called "Letting Go: How Philanthropists and Impact Investors Can Do More Good by Giving Up Control."
Oh yeah, we need that.
Yeah, right.
Or we need more good. We don't need. Maybe.
Hi, Meg.
Hi, Meg.
Hey.
We're just talking about how we need more good and less control.
Yeah, we were just getting into it.
And that's our whole vibe. So awesome.
So nice having you on. We'll see you. Just joking.
We solved everything.
Yeah, exactly.
Free Money Podcast is remarkably effective. I think we're still waiting for Ben, but in the meantime, we'll ask you. There's this kind of lack of democracy problem in philanthropy and in impact investing, to understate it. And like a lot of really well-intentioned people are out here trying to solve problems that they've never experienced. Is there anything to do about that, or is that just kind of the world is bad and that's the way things are?
Democracy in general, there's a lot to there's a lot to address there. But there is a way there is a way to make it better in the philanthropy and impact investing space. My book, Ben, Letting Go: How Philanthropists and Impact Investors Can Do More Good by Giving Up Control. In it, we write about some of the models for anything along the loans to gift spectrum that Edgar Villanueva talks about. How to make sure that that's not just someone, usually a cis white dude from up on high, saying, I want to solve this problem and this is how it should be solved and I will give you all of my money. It's very well intentioned, but if you're doing things to people, they don't tend to stick in the same way that they do if you are doing them with people and with their input and letting them say, actually, this is what we need. This is what we've seen work and not work, and we need to be on the same page if this is going to be successful. So that's bird's eye view there.
Are there any kind of like notable, mishaps, kerfuffles, issues that have that kind of typify, the arm's length model as it is?
There's a long list. There's a long list. Yeah. It's we lead off the book with this isn't strictly speaking investing, but Mark Zuckerberg in Newark is a great example. New York school systems legitimately have a lot of challenges, including funding. He said, I'm going to give you guys $100 million. But then they ended up kind of parachuting in all these consultants. And there's a whole book that was written about this. That's not my book, but we read it as part of our research. And that's, pretty much typifies how parents were finding out like the day of or the day before that their kid's school was closing, or that they'd have to, switch something around with their schedule. They were being invited to these, town halls, doing air bunnies, town halls where they were basically being, everyone saying, thanks for your input, but there wasn't actually it wasn't clear to them what control they had over shaping the project. We talk about the real difference between, feedback and letting go it is about power, right? It's at the end of the day, a power dynamic. And, think about the last time that you filled out a customer service form, for a company, tell us how we're doing. And maybe you fill it out, maybe you don't, but it's usually if you're going to take the time, you're like, they may not even read this. And so similarly, when you're asking people to give their time and give their opinion on, your investment project, if you're not actually saying, we're going to take all of these ideas and we will select the top 3 and then you will vote on them and we will in fact abide by that vote. If there's not just a clear path for we're asking you for your time and your thoughts and this is actually how it will be used, then you start from there's a pretty low trust differential already, but then you're the only people who are going to be weighing in are the people who love filling out forms or have nothing to do with work that day. Yeah.
I think, Sloan, I'm going to jump in on this next question because it relates to the structures of how we do this. And so much of my work is how do we design these processes and investment strategies to be effective? First off, it would be cool to hear how you define that spectrum of philanthropy into impact investing. As we think about structures, sometimes it's important to remind people what the different objective functions are and how they're different from traditional investing and that spectrum all the way to you're just giving money away. And then in terms of the structures, how do we actually delegate these authorities? Because in my world, we build these delegation frameworks. They're incredibly elegant and they drive really cool outcomes if you can get them right. But in your world, what is a really good structure or a good kind of means of letting go for these organizations to drive higher impact?
Right. No, it's a good question. And for the purposes of the book, philanthropy for us is grant making. It's, this is a gift. You're maybe measuring the results or asking them to report back, but you're not actually expecting a return. For impact investing, we're defining it more as there's an expectation of return or a loan being paid back. So that's how broadly speaking, we're defining the space. Hey, Ben.
Hi, Ben.
Hey, Ben. We were just jumping into some of the structures. Meg was just going to walk us through some of the structures that allow you to let go. We were just talking through some of your book. I'm excited to dig in.
Yeah. So I was just talking about, loans to gift spectrum and how we're defining philanthropy versus impact investing. And one distinction that we make in the book that sometimes gets lost on folks is that, impact investing grew out of traditional finance. Yes, it's got a philanthropic twist on it. And a lot of people, I think, believe that the origin story is that it's a form of philanthropy, but structurally it's much, much closer to traditional finance. So that's another really important distinction that we make. And then I forgot the rest of the question.
What are some of the structures that actually allow them to let go, right? So the actual, control it without neglecting the mission of it.
Right. And a really important piece of that is the distinction between lived experience and learned expertise. Ben and I both have, went to liberal arts colleges. I have a master's degree. He's getting a master's degree. It's not that knowledge is useless or that working on Wall Street for 10 years is useless. But if that's the only voice in the room and that's the only perspective at the decision-making table, you're going to get a very limited set of options. It's not going to reflect the people that, this, loan, investment, grant, whatnot, is intended to help. So on the philanthropy side, we have a process that's been around for about 40 years, officially called participatory grant making. And in that model, funding decisions are made by the community that the fund is intended to support. And they do that by, there's a couple different ways you can do that. With some, it's, setting the criteria for the grants. They do that with the community or have them narrow down applications, grant applications, or actually, vote on, we want to give, this is where we want the grant to go to. Last week, 2 weeks ago, I know you guys were talking about OnlyFans, and actually one of the what a really great example of this is the Red Umbrella Fund, which is a fund by and for sex workers. It grew out of a movement in the early 2000s, and they've been around for a really long time. And we're responsible for kind of getting institutional philanthropy to think about the perspective of, people who consensually engage in sex work versus lumping everything it's all sex trafficking, it's all human trafficking. And the people who make decisions are, they are activist groups that are led by sex workers, either current or former sex workers. And so on the philanthropy side, that's, Red Umbrella Fund is about 10 or 20 years old, but that model goes back to the 1970s. On the impact investing side, it's a lot newer. Impact investing itself, as you guys know, has only been, in the lexicon for about a decade. And the funds that we profiled in the book, a lot of them are very new, but the structures that are emerging are around who's on the investment committee, how due diligence is conducted, and also on who is sort of in charge of the balance sheet. And with the latter example, the Heron Foundation, they do some great stuff on the grant making side, but in terms of investing their endowment, they announced last year that they were going to fully transition control over those investment decisions to the communities that they serve. And they've been pretty transparent about how they're very much building the plane as they're flying it. And, the process is probably going to take years to fully do, but that transparency and that, commitment to the process being the point, frequent refrain in the book, that's really that's one end of the example. Ben, I don't know if you want to share a couple others. Yeah.
Well, Ben, maybe you could. One of the examples in your book, which goes to this impact investing piece, was the small business loan fund. I think that the working class residents of Boston were implementing, and so it'd be cool to just hear about that case study and the process of operation and the implications and kind of understand what the different outcomes are from what might be expected from that command and control style.
Of course.
Yeah. No, thanks for having us on the podcast. Sorry with the technical issues earlier. So I actually found out about the Boston Ujima Fund because the person who created it was the former president of the Boston NAACP. So just straight up former teacher, activist who was running the Boston NAACP. I used to work with the NAACP, and I knew that she was doing great things around economic justice in Boston 10 years ago. But the story is that this woman's name is Nia Evans. She basically, back in 2012, you all might remember, the city of Boston submitted a bid to have an Olympics in the city. And, when you have an Olympics in any city, it tends to stratify whatever wealth gaps there already are. People get pushed out of their neighborhoods. You have all these stadiums that create a little economic opportunity and then just sit empty for years, taking up space. And basically what happened was the city hired some high-powered, high-cost consultants to just develop a strategy for how to redevelop the entire south side of the city, which is, of course, very Black, very working class. And when residents found out about it, they were rightfully furious. And they kind of just, for Nia, she sort of said, I'm not even going to try to engage in the city's normal processes anymore. I'm not even going to try to send NAACP members to town meetings and have them hold signs and give speeches, because clearly the city isn't listening. They call the Boston, what's the BPD? They call it the Black People Displacement Agency, the Boston Housing Authority. So she said, I'm going to make my own model. And over the course of 2 years, they worked with these essentially Marxist academics. I'll just say it. I mean, they're what they are. And they co-designed, in the course of sort of dozens of community sessions, they co-designed this investment fund that invests to local small businesses. So it's sort of figuring out real estate. Are you going to get a dry cleaner in this spot in the neighborhood? Are you going to get a grocery store? We need more affordable housing. They designed this model called the Ujima Fund, where residents get to
contrast that with the way that philanthropy is typically practiced. I mean, I saw a story yesterday about the Giving Pledge. It's the iconic thing. Rich people say they'll give money away, and expect praise for that, and in some cases deserve praise for that. But this seems a lot more, kind of grassroots driven and community rooted, where the Giving Pledge people would seem to have to like do a lot of work to get into those communities, understand what's going on in order to even get to a place where they could write a check.
Right. You could spend months and hire consultants to tell you, hey, here's what the community members want, here's what they need. Or you could just literally ask them. Yeah, I mean, most philanthropy is incredibly top down, incredibly closed off, incredibly insular. We're seeing that folks inside philanthropy.
Yeah. I mean, like area vegan investment services,
especially younger folks.
I'm curious, when you think about, kind of the investment side of this, though, because I know, Ben, you're at a firm that's doing this participatory investing now. Meg, obviously, you've stared at this problem forever. Like, whenever you think about these philanthropies, these kind of impact opportunities, often people go, "Okay, cool, I'm giving money away." How does it work? How does it work differently when you're investing for a return?
I'll turn it over to Ben in a sec, but I think one important starting point is that it's not just about, it's less about the what and more about the how. So much of the impact investing and philanthropy conversation is about the causes themselves, which are all great. It's great to be committed to those causes. It's great to give them money. The control piece is about, okay, who decides, right? Who decides who gets the money? If you say you're committed to racial equity and want to invest with a racial equity lens, okay, so what does that actually mean? Have you talked to anyone who is, experienced with this issue to set up your process? But the Village Capital, where Ben works, and he can talk more about it. I think that's a really good example of how you actually do see there's a financial performance component to it.
Yeah, I mean, I work at Village Capital, and we invest in sort of high growth, tech-driven startups that have some sort of impact focus. So some of the companies we work with are helping people on the African continent send money around with their mobile phones. There's a lot of agriculture technology that's helping farmers in California save water with little sensors, and a lot of education ed tech companies. And the model we use is participatory, which means that we bring together groups of entrepreneurs, all sort of focused on the same problem. For instance, we'll bring together 10 entrepreneurs working on fintech in South Asia. And we'll put them through a training program. And then at the end of the program, all the entrepreneurs have sort of interviewed each other, started to sort of poke critiques at each other's businesses, watched each other develop. And we ask them as a group to collectively decide who should get our money. So it's a kind of very, very different way of investing in startups than most venture capital, which is a bunch of three guys in a skyscraper in San Francisco just say, I like this business because founder is tall. But we've done it 70 times, which is a lot. And we found the number that Meg is referring to is that, number one, when you compare it to like a control group, number one, it does result in more women getting money. And number two, our portfolio is performing on par with any other portfolio that would be picked normally, or even slightly better. So
how do you
that's again, that's high growth tech startups. Very different when you're talking about small businesses in Boston, but the principle behind it, the participation is the same. We had some of that in the first few years. Because the first few years, it was just like, let's just try this out. And yeah, there was some cheating, there was some gamesmanship. We basically worked in a bunch of little tweaks here and there. So one of the things is that the entire process is transparent, so everyone can see the score you give to everybody else. Whoever gives, so it's complicated, but there's 8 categories on which you can give someone a score of 1 to 8. So it's like a very, it takes a whole day to do this scoring. But for every startup, let's say startup X comes up. Startup X, we're looking at category Y, and it's who gave them the highest score in that category and who gave them the lowest score in that category. And then they have to explain themselves. So, let's say someone was trying to cheat and give their friend hires, you have to actually, so we created but it's a game, and I think that the system that we're talking, there's any system that we're talking about, creating a set of rules around which groups of people can deliver money. There's an element of game what's the word? Game
When you
design
guys
to
go
it.
through this
And
process,
it's also kind of fun.
in here
for that
you
reason, and it's
describe
engaging
that
and
process.
yeah,
A lot of the
there
work
are
we've done at
definitely rules.
Stanford, where I'm on faculty, research faculty, we've studied stakeholder engagement policies for the development of infrastructure, and how the more kind of holistic you are in stakeholder engagement, the more like uncertainties you convert into risks. So like, I don't know, this is maybe a little too academic, but like the notion is that capital flees uncertainty and it chases risk, because you need risk to get paid, right? That like we get paid for taking financial risks, but uncertainty, you have no clue what's going to happen. And so this participatory process to me feels like a pathway, like a novel pathway of taking all of these uncertainties and bringing them into a framework that allows you to better understand the risks and potential outcomes. And so you can start to like convey this with like almost commercial logic. I don't know if that resonates with you, or if you've seen your funders and philanthropists and impact investors talk in those terms.
Yeah, no, I think that definitely resonates. It's a way of, it's a way of wrapping your head around. If you're saying, okay, we want to invest in a small business in this community or invest in this type of technology, and you don't know all the unknowns about, as you said, about the market, about the potential customer base, about the community where you want to manufacture, set up shop, all those things can be they'll at least be more known and can be quantified as risks rather than simply being, well, we'll figure this out. Lucas Turner Owens, who was the first fund manager of Ujima, when we talked to him about their model, which it's the residents of these neighborhoods in Boston that vote on where their investment goes, and they may have invested as little as like I think $50 is the minimum. And the fund also has investments from local institutions around Boston, big name investors, but only the residents get to decide how the money's spent. And he said, there's a real logic to this, that if they say we really want to invest in, this area doesn't have a good grocery store, we want to invest in a grocery store, like there's every reason to think that they will then become paying customers of that service. Like there's a real logic to it that I think fits very nicely into what you're describing.
Yeah, it's like the next evolution of the crowd-funded platform. Like for some reason, crowdfunding, it felt like it was like a moment in time. Like you, when I say that word, you can almost transport yourself back 7 years ago when it was kind of happening.
Yeah.
But like that, there was a thing there where it was a blend of like customer/investor, and it was de-risking by saying, oh look, there's this crowd, and I've seen I did a paper on this. I've seen crowds used for like local infrastructure. Like, hey, where should we put the playground? Like, let's get the community to put up the first 1% of the cost of the playground. And if you could do that, then you knew that like it was worth the other 99%, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot of examples of participatory decision making on the municipal level. And we talk in the afterward about participatory budgeting, which can happen. It can be run by a government on the local, state, federal level. It can be run by a body like the World Bank or a non-governmental, one of these larger multilaterals. And yeah, I mean, it makes total sense. I like that one where you have to get them to commit a little bit of money first to make sure that they actually want it.
Bay Area.
And I guess I would worry that
in the Bay Area,
you would just have the people who can afford to give the money.
His Stanford
right? So you still get the stuff and that's where it's interesting. We've been looking recently into whether this stuff applies to real estate. Are you all in DC? Well, yeah. I mean, so then we all have the same thing where there's these sort of local fights around development and, who's actually deciding what happens in these neighborhoods where people who've lived there forever get kicked out because the university has expanded or whatever. The elite institution has decided it wants to buy this building. And then all those employees need really nice condos to live in. So we were like looking at how does participation apply to this? And it's actually kind of hard because who is the, what's the word? Who has standing, right? Who lives in the neighborhood? Is it the closest 200 people, the closest 2,000 people? A property takes 10 years to develop. So
God bless
the neighborhood's going to change over those 10 years.
I'm
it's a little different than when you just cut a check to human rights group. So I don't really have a point with that other than that it's interesting. But this ultimately gets public ownership and all sorts of fun stuff that that's really where we need to go.
people. And like, that's a form of participatory funding too, where they're like, they participate in democracy and then they fund whatever they want. I'm curious if this makes you a little bit of an odd duck in the institutional fundraising game, because like, you might read, if you're out here trying to invest in companies this way, and you talk to investors and they're all like fulled up on the metaverse or whatever, and they want to invest in metaverse companies. Do you find that, I guess it's probably great to be able to avoid those hype trains by structural design in the firm, but does it weirden the process of operating the business? You don't want to know anything more.
I had to ask that last time too.
Which superheroes are part of the metaverse?
Like, what is the metaverse? I don't know what the metaverse is. Maybe behind the name. Sorry, Meg, you want to? Oh, this is the Mark Zuckerberg thing with the. Oh yeah, this is the Mark Zuckerberg thing. Yeah, I mean, I just think people associate venture capital with like Mark Zuckerberg because The Social Network was a movie. Like it's like this stuff isn't real. It's all just made up terms, right? And so why does investing have to be this thing where you have to invest in 10 companies, expect 9 of them to fail, and
speaking of like
Facebook? That's just the way that everyone else.
I was going to say, speaking of the insular insanity,
what Meg was saying earlier on. Yeah, I mean, the metaverse can get the money it needs to get from,
I think the venture capital space,
there's a lot more types of businesses
could definitely benefit
are not
from
based on the cities
de-biasification. I don't know if that's a word. And you had mentioned, Meg, that like one of the things that this form of decision making facilitates is like removing bias. I'm curious if you have any examples, or if there's like a part of the process that like allows us to kind of get at those issues of all the different biases we see in the space.
Yeah, debiasification. I mean, when you think about it, there's already a risk happening in venture capital. If you're like only investing in, white founders who are guys who went to Stanford, then like you're like that's not a very diverse portfolio. So diversity can mean a whole range of things.
But it's a pattern that works, I'm told. Well, the pattern matching, that's the sad thing, right? So like literally there's a push to the heuristic. And so the co-creation path, ideally you're bringing in different voices and you're getting different perspectives, and maybe that breaks you from that pattern. But it's true. They revert to the pattern.
Right, and the idea is to test other patterns. We look for venture capital specifically. We look at what's your deal flow look like? How are you identifying potential opportunities? There's been a ton written about that and how to mitigate bias in that process. And then when you look at also the due diligence process, we saw some opportunities there as well. Seats on an investment committee, honestly, are really that's kind of the most straightforward way to bring in more voices to the decision-making table. And that will look different depending on how the fund is structured. But like the Olamina fund, which is based in the Bay Area, they have that model for their fund, which invests in BIPOC-led financial institutions, and they have a committee that's includes people who are BIPOC who work at those institutions or have experience with them. And the frustrating thing I think for some of this is that because these models are so new, it's hard to say we can absolutely prove that this is that this works in this way. A lot of it is so experimental, although that's I think part of the exciting thing about it. Investment is about risk. It is about taking a chance and seeing what works and saying 9 times out of 10 you probably are going to fail, but the 10th time who knows what's going to happen. And I think going in with that's a mindset shift, and you're right, not every investor is going to embrace it, but I think that's Ben alluded to this earlier, that we're seeing that generationally be a shift, and hopefully that momentum continues.
Yeah, we'll be cheering it. I mean, I want to ask you one more question, then I'll let you guys go. You mentioned an investment committee, and we roast investment committees here with some frequency because, at least, in the example of here in New York City, we've got more committees than we do subway lines governing our large institutional investments, and running those winds up being a nightmare because you have to convene 400 people at 17 different times in order to make a decision. And I'm curious, how does one avoid the kind of encroaching bureaucratic nightmare aspect of this, right? Are there costs of this model in terms of increased time to receiving funds? That are challenges that kind of need to be mitigated and designed for.
Yeah, it takes more time. It generally takes more time. There are certain models that are about voting online, and there are some really great tech platforms like Lumio and Polis that you can use for that. But the majority of the models we're talking about involve convening people in person or over Zoom, which has become a lot easier to get 400 people on Zoom than in person. And yeah, the Zoom stuff kind of sucks because you're on Zoom and no one wants to be on Zoom for 2 hours, on a Thursday afternoon after you work. But the in-person stuff that we went to the Boston Ujima Fund, we went to a meeting right before the pandemic shut everything down. And it's, it's this 2-hour-long meeting. You're in a room that's normally used as like a community center for like activists. There's a real like energy of sort of activism in the room. People have cookies and orange juice, and everyone goes around the room and introduces themselves. And, frankly, for the first hour, I was like, oh my God, this is the slowest meeting I've ever been in. But that like introduction pays off because by the end of the meeting, you're like, I know 20 people incredibly well. And, people stick around for an hour and a half after the meeting to talk. It's the like Mike said, the process is the point. I'm not trying to say that the entire world should be participatory, everything. What we say in the book is what if, we want to get to a point where 50% of investment committees or grant making committees have at least one person with lived experience on it. And maybe participatory grant making is a model that works for 25% of institutional philanthropy and 10% of
awesome. Letting go how philanthropists and impact investors.
We're not saying it needs to be at all times, but if done right in the right place, if applied as a tool,
thank you guys.
It can really have an unbelievable knock-on effect.
Wow. I am just going to give up a little bit more control in my day-to-day life every day now. I'm just going to try and.
We did a really big project at Stanford, which is like coming to the close. I didn't want to distract from that conversation, but it was about co-creation in projects. And Joanna Sia and Jess Remington on our team did something that's called co-creation. And so I have deep understanding of what Ben and Meg are doing, and it's awesome. And it really is the future of decision making in uncertain and difficult environments. It's kind of starting in impact and philanthropy, but actually there's a growing number of tools to mobilize the power of the crowd and just get smarter at decision making. So I think it actually goes to the core of decision science, and that some of the things they're inventing now will be applied in investment committees at pension funds. And I can actually think of one, which I'm not sure if I'm supposed to say, but you're using this technology platform to actually enlist a big crowd. And they score the crowd comes in to help make a decision. And they're seeing better outcomes. They're making smarter decisions. And that's because they're getting a more diverse set of inputs and but engaging in that in a rigorous way rather than in kind of a, ad hoc or, tailored way each time. So very cool book.
Very cool concept. And yeah, I've seen similar, when I was scoring all the public companies on earth, not too long ago, there are a number of companies, particularly in fashion, that kind of, view themselves as mostly this platform on top of a lot of data, that allows them to kind of validate concepts really quickly to kind of do an alt H&M, alt Zara fast fashion thing.
Right.
Not particularly. That's not a particularly good for the world, but instantiation of it. But the whole concept of those companies, the whole reason that that they exist and what they'll sell to you is we have this unique participatory way of deciding what gets built.
Participatory is code for collaboration. And so when I wrote the book, Reframing Finance, it was all about how collaboration among investors would facilitate innovation because they're scared to innovate on their own. And if they can pull in their peers and like widen the kind of number of organizations around the table, they can pool capital, pool their career risk, pool the actual, all those things.
Yeah.
And so that in my mind, like that collaboration, that participation, like this is a pathway to trying new things.
Yeah.
And doing it in a way that like everybody kind of gets cover. I mean, not that that's like, but it's a beautiful
thing.
It's a beautiful thing. Like,
you kind of launder the career risk.
You do.
And like by creating buy-in, by having partners, and then, you're able to do truly revolutionary things without, seeming like that was your explicit intention.
Yeah.
Because you simply create space to do revolutionary.
Because starting stuff is hard.
Starting stuff is hard. Having some issues with sound effects.
Darn it.
But there we go.
There we go. Because starting stuff is hard happens to be our new segment.
Yeah, exactly.
What stuff did you have that was hard for the stuff you're starting this week?
We're going to me first. Invest Vegan, today is September 7th. Invest Vegan is open to the public today. We're taking customer accounts. And
is there a minimum?
No.
Can I have an account then, please?
Yes, of course you can, Ashby.
Okay. How do I do it? Like, what should I do? Send you an email? Do I go online?
You go to investvegan.org. And when you're there, there's, basically there's a little call to action at the bottom of the page.
Okay.
You can, schedule a meeting with me to talk about the strategy in detail if you'd like. And there's also like an opportunity to just open up the questionnaire and begin filling out the questionnaire.
Wow.
Because the big, obviously managing the investments is hard. Managing the portfolio is hard. All that stuff is hard. But what I'm really trying to nail here is kind of a mass customization that allows me to service a lot of people at once.
Awesome.
Because if you come out and say, I will literally take your $10, Ashby, and manage to put them in a diversified portfolio of 50 stocks.
Yeah.
Crazy what they're doing with technology.
Well, I'm thinking the starting of this stuff is hard for you, but it sure sounds easy for me, which is quite good.
That's the goal. That's the goal. Hard for me, easy for you.
All right, beautiful. Well, my little instance of starting stuff is hard. I interpreted the question a little differently this week because I keep seeing pension funds making net zero commitments.
Ooh,
and so they're starting themselves on this pathway. And I know, and now you guys know, that none of them have a clue on how they're going to do it. And that's a true statement. Like they're all making these. And I think this is a little bit like when Kennedy was like, we're going to the moon. We're going to the moon because it's hard, And I love it when Kennedy said, we choose to go to the moon and do the other things. And I always wanted to know what were the other things in the Kennedy statement. But anyway.
They're drugs, probably.
Probably, or people who aren't his wife. But I'm bummed. But look, I think what's interesting about all that is Kennedy had no clue how we were going to the moon, and neither do these pension funds in terms of net zero. But it's important to make commitments when you're starting things. Get out into the public and be like, I'm doing this. Yeah. And like you came on the show, I don't know, a couple months ago, and you're like, I'm doing this vegan thing.
Starting to think.
And then 1 week later, you had the most delightful website on the internet. But anyway, that's the important thing about starting stuff is hard. Making public commitments, it's hard.
Yeah.
Boy, it does tie you to the mast, as they say, force you to make progress and continue to get towards that big goal. So kudos to you and kudos to these pension funds.
Yeah. And they're really doing a good job using their position in the industry. But even by going on and be like, we have no idea how we're going to do this, but we're pretty sure people will solve it for us if we keep making enough noise about it.
Yeah. That's pretty confident. It's like, we're going to the moon. Oh, we're not working on it, but we're going to the moon.
When you make those pizzas, we'll buy them. Just FYI.
Exactly.
Which it's a very enlightened way to live life, I think.
I think it's wonderful. Yeah.
Speaking of enlightenment, Yet another
show's flowing today.
Yet another segment. Yeah, we got these great guests. Everyone shows up on.
I know, exactly.
The technology platform never disappoints us. It's really a beautiful thing. The first question we have this
Would
time.
you want to give a little description of what Dear Ashby is, and maybe have people give?
Oh yeah, maybe we
ratings?
should. Yeah. Well, you're saying people don't already know. This is the segment where we take your questions and we put them in front of the one and only Dr. Ashby Monk.
Hello.
And then we riff on them.
Sweet.
If you would like to ask a question of your very own, just email us, freemoneypod@gmail.com or freemoneypodcast.com, which is the second most delightful website on the internet behind investbeacon.org.
It is also incredibly lovely because there's something that doesn't exist anywhere else on Earth. A meme swamp.
A meme swamp. Yeah.
I have never. I think you invented something, unless you tell me you stole that from somewhere. But the meme swamp.
I think I did too. I think I innovated. The meme swamp.
Was it co-created?
It was a participatory pod. It's like
fuck yes.
Well, the way that those memes get curated is I share memes on my Instagram account all the time, and the ones that people like, I put on the meme swamp.
Oh my god. That's how I do the news on this show. The things that people like on my Twitter feed, that becomes news.
Yep. I mean, it's all
co-creation.
It's all co-creation.
Read the book.
Synergy.
All right. What's the first question?
First question is I am excited for your take on this, and I hope it's fire and brimstone. The SEC seems to be getting pretty serious about looking into greenwashing in asset management.
Yes.
How do you think this changes the bar, quote unquote, for what large institutional investors expect from their asset management?
So the bar will go from being subterranean to something above terranean.
So it'll be like a couple inches above the floor.
It's going to go from below ground to above ground is what I'm trying to say. Yeah. So look, it's so insane. Like, depending on your math, there's 35 trillion or 90 trillion in sustainable capital. And there's no data today. Let alone the world still sucks. Let's leave that to the side. There's no outcomes data or analytics. There's no established mechanism to integrate these data into decision making.
Yep.
And so we have 35 to 90 trillion dollars of capital operating without an established theoretical framework. So of course it's bullshit, most of it.
Yeah.
And so what's going to change to the question? We're going to get real serious about outcomes. We're going to stop focusing so much on, does this company have a policy statement? And we're going to start asking, does this company kill human beings with cigarettes? And if so, can we invest in their murder bond?
Yeah, exactly. How do we de-risk?
How do we demurtify this product? And can we finance it with a bond?
Just picture an alternative Ashby with a green visor on at a hedge fund. He's like, oh, wow, murder bonds.
Murder bonds. Bye. So that's my brimstone. That's my fire and brimstone for you.
That's welcome. Yeah, it's very, honestly, it feels like you're taking crazy pills until the SEC starts investigating somebody who's been when they announced that they were investigating DWS. I had actually had 3 meetings that prior week that mentioned a bullshit thing that DWS had done. 3 separate bullshit things that DWS has done.
Wow.
For something to be that high in the zeitgeist.
Yeah.
And it's not like I'm meeting with a zillion asset managers or anyone. Anyway, next question. Do you see any sort of intersection between spiritual practices and sustainable investing?
I love it. I love picturing our listeners just being super deep, just thoughtful. A lot of the people listening to this, they're in a lotus position. I don't know if you do that.
I actually am in a lotus
position. I see
you.
You are. Actually, literally, you are. You can't see me, but I am in it too, right? That's how we do it.
Yeah.
And I think it's a fantastic question because I love to read about all the different spiritual things, mostly because those are pathways to self-knowledge. And so I think there is a connection between the spiritual practices and sustainable investing and investing generally. If you like spend much time like understanding the powers of meditation, or what like monasteries were for in like Christian religion back 100 years, it was about building this like muscle of focus. Like there's a concentration muscle that you can improve. And so increasing concentration and focus, both inward and outward, is a part of all these spiritual practices. And I think that focus on assets and portfolios and where we are in the world, I do see a connection there. Interestingly, I always used to mention this when I would talk about investment beliefs. Investment beliefs are something that we have helped a lot of long-term investors implement. Google investment beliefs, and you'll see Canada Pension Plan, Ontario Teachers, CalPERS, Australian Super. They've all got them. And investment beliefs are kind of the equivalent of like, the 10 Commandments. It's like there are certain things that we think is important for markets to function effectively. We are the base of capitalism, by the way. And we think long-termism is important, that risk and reward are important, like key kind of foundational pillars that are sometimes hard to quantify, by the way, where it's like difficult to find the perfect theoretical justification to say, we think there's value in long-termism. But we write it down anyways, and it's meant to guide the internal folks at pension funds. And then the combination of those is just really about self-knowledge, like where you are in the world, what are you capable of doing, what strategies can you outperform in, what should you go passive. So I love this. I think somebody should write something about like spirituality and investing, because, like take the other side. There's a whole lot of people who still think markets are efficient, which is about as like religious a belief as you can find. Like, the God from above, what is it? The free market, the invisible hand.
Yeah, I will be touched by the invisible hand of the free market, and it will be good, and it will.
Yeah.
You tell it. I mean, like there's so much room for like a comparative religion. Kind of look at this.
Almost knocked me out of my lotus position here.
And of course, like the Quakers, some of the least problematic white people in the history of white people. We're out here being sustainable investing homies back in like 1760 with the establishment of, Quakers fiduciary and stuff, 1790, but it was a long time ago. Anyway, being a hippie's fine.
Awesome.
The last question, I guess this is sort of a transition to the
garden tip.
The garden tip, and I guess this asker may not really understand California as a concept.
Interesting.
What sort of cover crops are you planting for winter? And sub question is winter a thing?
Yeah, well, it's so funny you asked that, because there's like 4 problems with this question, but we love you for asking. Just so you know, like we just love you so much. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, it's so.
We, like in my little area here, we live up in the hills, where we have a bit more space because land is very pricey in the Californias. And so, we actually, in the areas we don't want growth, we put mulch down.
Yep.
And so that prevents weeds from popping up, because actually in the winter, it's like one of the few times that like a bunch of shit grows naturally. Grass. Yeah, we get a lot of grass, shitloads of grass. In fact, in the spring, we have to have somebody come and weed whack it all because of the forest fire risk.
Oh.
So remember that we live in a place where like having a lot of ground cover is dangerous as F. So like we put mulch down to keep the ground cover down for certain areas.
Keep your house from stepping up.
Exactly. This is like trying to keep my fire insurance down. And then the other parts, we just let it grow like crazy. And it's beautiful. Like you get all these like beautiful spring flowers that come up with this stuff. But eventually, as the flowers die, like you need the weed whacker dude to come out and clear it, so you don't have to, because then by the time you get to August, if you leave it, it's brown. And it's like, my God, it's like the ultimate fire kindling.
Yep.
So that's what we do. And we don't really have winter here, by the way. So
yeah. So like, by the way, like, so, if we did that, we could die. And also winter's not a thing.
And like, to tell you how much winter's not a thing, I have the same tomato plant that has lived 4 years in a row.
I saw that on Twitter and I'm so jealous of you.
Yes.
We're in a fight about that.
Yeah, it's like
my tomatoes are like these 98-pound weaklings upstairs. Like,
They die. Well, I mean, you're in New York. It's cold as shit. Here, our tomato plants are like annuals, schmanuals. Like we just go every year.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty rad. Like, I mean, here cover crops are a valid concept, and cover crops for the uninitiated are things that you grow over the winter that are kind of sacrificial in a way, that kind of like keep soil alive and replenish nutrients so that you can plant the crops you actually want. But this year I on a hot tip from a friend, I'm planting garlic as a cover crop.
That's awesome.
Yeah, which you can just do. You can just plant the garlic that you get.
By the way, like oven roasted garlic, like so good. Man,
it's so easy. You cut off the top, you drizzle some oil on it, you put it in the oven, and then when it's done, you can literally just squeeze it.
You squeeze it, and then people are like, "My God, you're such a good cook," and you're like, "I know." Yeah.
And if you want people to think you're a witch, just pop it in the blender afterwards and like mix it up with some other stuff, and you get your roast garlic emulsion sauce.
And then you put that on pasta.
And you put it on pasta.
And then literally people are giving you the Top Gun high five, where it's like up top, then down low. You know what I mean?
Up top, down low. Yep. And you actually get that the vintage Tom Cruise energy.
You do.
You do. I guess our last segment is what's happening in the garden. We sort of,
already. Let's save whatever we had because this was a long one.
We don't want to give the people too much content.
Exactly.
They may never come back. We hope you come back.
We do. We love you.
Love you. Bye.
Bye.
I'm looking like money. Let me get rain.